Hey there, Jay Beletsky here with a review of Kirai and the Urami Crew. Kirai is an extremely flexible master, and in my opinion, one of, if not the best master in the game right now. She has access to a lot of strong features, good damage, good chip damage, good mobility, good tar pitting, good debuffing, summoning of course being one of the most powerful things a master can do, and the best ability in the game being one of the features of her crew, which is incorporeal. The one thing that I want to really hammer down is a lot of her power comes from the fact that she just straight up ignores the gimmicks of maybe 1/3 to a half of the crews in the entire game, thanks to a large amount of condition removal, good healing ability, and incorporeal allowing you to ignore terrain, especially hazardous terrain. Things like Wildfire, Brewmaster, Tai-Chi, Experimental, Trixie, Fae, etc., etc. All these have gimmicks that your opponent just has to deal with because it's one of the things that your opponent can do well, whether that's conditions or terrain, and Kirai just kind of doesn't care about either of them because she has access to really strong condition removal and terrain ignoring abilities. This makes it so that she can pretty much go into any matchup and you don't have to worry about getting hard countered. A lot of crews worry about that. She's also not hard countered by armor 2, which I know is very difficult for some crews. She has enough damage output and chip damage to get around that, and she doesn't necessarily have any standout weaknesses. A lot of crews suffer from one major weakness, whether it's maybe not having scheme runners, having the master maybe has to pull all the weight. Kirai doesn't really have to deal with any of that. Now, before we get to talking about individual models, let's take a moment to talk about Vengeance. Vengeance is Kirai's and Urami's key ability. After resolving an action that targeted and damaged this model, the attacking model suffers +1 damage. Now, keep in mind that it only goes off if the model survived the damage. If the model is killed, then this doesn't go off and your opponent doesn't take the damage. But it's a really easy ability to use, you don't even have to think about it, and unfortunately for your opponent, he does. You have to keep this in mind when you're attacking Kirai's crew, but if you're playing Kirai, you just kind of, every time you mark off some wounds on your models, you go, oh, and you take a damage. Oh, and you take a damage. Oh, and you take a damage. This is one of the most perfect ways of dealing chip damage, especially to things that have armor, especially armor +2. It's one of the best ways of dealing with armor +2. And it's just an extremely strong ability. A lot of time, if your opponent takes vengeance damage 2 to 3 times, if he lands 2 to 3 attacks, that's essentially you for free getting to attack a model and hit it, and then deal either 2 or 3 damage depending on what your minimum damage is. So it's kind of, for every 2 times you hit one of my models, I get a free attack that succeeds against you. Now let's go over Kirai. Kirai's especially important aspects are Hatred, Blood and Wind, Soothe Spirit, and Spirit Barrage. And one of the key things with Kirai, and the thing I'm going to mention first because it just plays into her entire kit, is that she always wants to take the Whisper upgrade for Intuition. At the start of this model's activation, it may look at the top 3 cards of its fate deck and return them in any order. Research Specimens, which I'll briefly mention, is okay. It might go off 1 out of every couple of games. Even if it doesn't, the Whisper already pays for itself thanks to Intuition. Now, the reason Intuition is good is at the beginning of your turn, you draw 3 cards, and let's say over the course of, when it's really important, the first 3 turns, you're probably going to save 2 to 3 cards on Blood and Wind. It makes it so that you don't have to keep a high card, especially a high crow, in your hand. And if you do pull a high crow with this ability, that's essentially you saving a soul stone because you don't have to spend a soul stone to use Blood and Wind that turn. So if 1 out of those first 3 turns you pull a high crow, that's it immediately as if the Whisper costs 1 less. If you do it twice, it's almost as if the Whisper is free. But it goes further than that. Because Soothe Spirit is such a low TN, it only requires a 4, a lot of the times you'll just be able to set the beginning of your activation up so that you can quickly Blood and Wind and then Soothe Spirit with the preparations trigger. Like let's say you draw 3 cards and you get 4 of Rams, 7 of Tomes, and let's say the King of Tomes, 13 of Tomes. So immediately, as soon as I see a mid-level tome, I know I'm going to be using that for preparations. Target gains focus +1 is essentially you not spending an AP for this action, because the concentrate action is already kind of like a 1-to-1 cost effectiveness of 1 AP. You know, you use 1 AP, you get 1 focus. In the same way that you use 1 AP, you get to make 1 attack action. Soothe Spirit with the preparations trigger is almost like you get the value of this AP in the way that you get the focused condition, but on top of that you get to heal 1, 2, 3. So in this case, for instance, you can play, you know, at the top you put the 7 of Tomes, then the King of Tomes if you want to heal for a lot, or the 4 of Rams if you don't care how much you heal, you really just want to make sure you get that focused in. And then the King. So you get immediately to Soothe Spirit with the focused, heal for 1, and then use the King to Blood and Wind and summon whatever you want to summon. That's just one example. It comes into play almost every single turn where Kirai is not wasting her AP thanks to the intuition on this upgrade. Now, the things that you're really looking for with the intuition is high masks for coordinated attack, because if you hit with a high mask, it's like getting a free AP out of one of your models when they get to take a free attack action. Obviously, high cards in general, or especially high crows for Blood and Wind, and those mid-level tomes for preparations, as well as just, you know, good cards in general to heal for 2 or 3. Rams can be used to get shielded 1. Sometimes that comes into play, especially if something's at low health. Shielded 1 plus Incorporeal can save you 2 damage. If something's on 1 wound, you, let's say, heal it for 1 plus give it shielded. Suddenly it has 3 effective health. It's not bad. Mark Soul is almost never going to come into play. There's way better ways of you putting adversary on enemies, but every once in a while, maybe you'll pull a high tome. Maybe you'll just be taking this action and you'll end up hitting with a tome and you'll put it on your enemy. It's never bad. And finally, Friends on the Other Side, the other trigger on Spirit Barrage. Sometimes you'll just end up being able to target something with 2 wounds. I usually don't use focus on Kirai. Occasionally, if Kirai really has nothing to do with one of her AP, I'll focus with her. I never really bet on being able to do 3 or 4 damage with it. I usually just do 2, but if something has 2 wounds left and you end up hitting with a crow, hey look, you get a free Gaki, and Gaki aren't bad. It ignores friendly fire. It's got a 12-inch range, which is absolutely huge. Stat 6 is good. Other things to mention is that Blood and Wind summons within 6 inches. If you include the base size, depending on what you summon, it can be it's on average it's usually an additional inch, so you have a threat range of 7 inches away from Kirai, plus, you know, whatever action you're going to do, whether it's a charge or for something like a drowned, which we'll get to, you know, throwing up on your enemies. Shears is okay. It's stat 6, which is good. The only real use for it is sometimes, you know, you'll just activate Kirai and you'll notice that, oh look, my opponent doesn't have any cards in his hand, my opponent doesn't have any soul stones, and I just so happen to have a high crow, or I just so happen to have an extra stone in my pool, and you'll charge something and kill it immediately. It's really not bad at all, but it'll very rarely come into play because Execute does not get to actually do the auto kill very often. Her bonus action, I've Got Your Back, sometimes it'll come into play. Pulling Kirai is usually running around like between 6 to 12 inches away from the main conflict of the battle. So it will come into play sometimes where you really need to get something out. That's one of the weaknesses of Kirai's crew. She doesn't have much movement that isn't walk actions available to her. So once you're stuck in combat, you really just have to spend the AP to disengage. You don't really get free moves out of combat using little pushes or lures or tricks like that, especially out of activation. Sooth Spirit, I've Got Your Back, and Blood and Wind all have a range of 6, so as long as you stay about 6 inches away from the conflict, you make sure that nothing can charge you, she'll be just fine. I've Got Your Back also allows you to dump a card. Like, let's say you use Intuition and you get the Black Joker. Well, that's perfect. Put the Black Joker on the top. First thing you do is I've Got Your Back. All you have to do is target an engaged model within 6 inches, and you pitch the Black Joker. It doesn't do anything bad to you. Hatred is her most important ability, and it's when the adversary condition would end within line of sight, no range. This model may suffer 1 damage. If it does, the condition doesn't end. Adversary is one of the best things about the Urami Crew, and the fact that you can have it not end at the end of the turn and roll over to the next turn, where the things that'll be activating at the top of the turn, like your Drowned, like your Goryo, can immediately take advantage of those extra cards, that extra approximately 15% chance to hit, start sucking cards out of your opponent's hand as he has to cheat if he doesn't want things to get hit. Have additional chances to hit triggers, especially on Goryo, that have 2 really good triggers on their attack. It's just really good. She will be taking a lot of ping damage. For every time one of the things she summons activates, she'll take a damage. Every single time she uses Hatred, she'll take a damage, but she does have opportunities to heal, which we'll get to later. Overall, Kirai is an incredibly good support model. She doesn't do a lot of damage, but that's okay because her totem does, and that's kind of all part of the package that is the free thing you get with your crew, her and her totem. And overall, she's just always useful every single time. Now, to quickly go over the Vengeful Spirit upgrade, which is what attaches to the things you summon with Kirai, with the Blood and Wind action. It gives the model slow. It makes it so that at the start of your model's activation, Kirai takes 1 damage, and it adds a crow to all melee actions. For the vast majority of the models, this is just a trigger which allows Kirai to heal 1, 2, 3 if you kill something, but it does something special for Drowned, which makes Drowned one of the best summons in the entire game, which we'll get to. One other thing that I want to mention really quick is Blood and Wind is once per turn, but it's not if you're summoning Ikiryo, and we're about to get to Ikiryo now. Ikiryo is a mid-range damage model with the bonus that it does irreducible damage. It doesn't really have anything super special about it. It's not very tanky with 6 wounds, defense 3, incorporeal terrifying, but it's definitely not squishy either. Like, it'll always get hit, but you also kind of want it to get hit because then you deal vengeance damage and then you get to resummon it with Kirai. One of the best things Kirai can do is resummon Ikiryo. It only takes an 11, and Ikiryo doesn't gain slow. And Ikiryo can also activate twice in a turn. So if Ikiryo activates, attacks twice, dies, then it can get summoned back, activate, and attack 2 more times. Move 6 with Incorporeal is incredibly good. You can just hide behind various impassable terrain pieces and then charge through them. The fact that you can charge without line of sight, unlike last edition in Malifaux, makes Incorporeal incredibly good, and I'll show many examples of this when we get to the kind of exhibition part of the review towards the end. Kirai Soul is what lets you not have to attach the Vengeance upgrade. when you summon it with the Blood and Wind action. Death Touch is a decent attack, 1-inch range, 6, 2, 3, 4. It's irreducible, which is really good. If the target is killed, this model heals 2. Sometimes it'll just happen. 2 very, very good offensive triggers, which just make it a much better attack than it seems, despite only being 2, 3, 4. Usually, the way that I look at triggers is that if an attack has 2 really good offensive triggers, it kind of takes it up to the next level. So like a 2, 4, 5 with 2 offensive triggers is almost like a 3, 5, 6 to me, which is obscene. Feast of Vengeance is built in, so if you end up killing something with Ikiryo, your Kirai heals 1, 2, 3, so that takes off some of the chip damage. Unfortunately, not the best bonus action. Sometimes you're just not gonna be able to use your bonus action with Ikiryo, but it's a free totem that is a combat model, and ending a condition on yourself is never a bad thing, especially because you can't fail the action. Sometimes you'll have something like staggered, you'll be able to dump it off and then charge 6 inches away anyway. Yeah, nothing wrong with Ikiryo. You get him for free, or her for free, every single game, and she's just a really, really strong model. Lost Love is next. You should take Lost Love in every single Kirai list. Some of the things he can do is Soothe Spirit, and he can Soothe Spirit on Kirai. This is your main way of making sure Kirai is topped off. You usually want to keep Kirai above 10 wounds so that she can't quickly be assassinated by something that catches you by surprise. It only requires a 5 with a range of 6 inches. He's always going to be in range because of By Your Side. At the start of this model's activation, discard a card, place itself within 2 inches of a friendly non-minion that shares a keyword with it, which is going to be Kirai or Ikiryo or Datsue Ba if you take Datsue Ba. But that's not the only thing Lost Love can do. The second thing is he ends conditions needing only a 7, again with a 6-inch range, which is very, very strong. And sometimes these triggers will come into place. Cleanse, remove all scheme, corpse, and scrap markers within 2 inches of what you heal. Burnout, deal 2 damage and gain fast. It's pretty good. But the biggest thing you can do is By Your Side. By Your Side makes Lost Love one of the best surprise schemers in the game. You can do things like activate Lost Love, teleport 12 inches away next to Ikiryo, walk and then drop a ski marker where you need it. Or in one game that I'll probably show you later, I By Your Sided to Ikiryo, quickly healed something that needed to be healed, and then walked to 4 inches to engage another model and get a take prisoner point. With 6 health, Lost Love is definitely not squishy. He doesn't have Incorporeal, but with 6 health, he's usually going to need 2 attacks to take him down. Nihilism will sometimes do something, and Protected Urami will keep him protected when, maybe after he's taken some damage and you don't want him to actually be finished off. You pitch a card and he doesn't die. Lost Love is just an incredibly, incredibly strong model. Very versatile, just does a lot of things that are useful for the crew, and is a schemer on top of all of that. Seishin. Now, Seishin is probably, next to Incorporeal, the number 2 reason why Kirai is just a ridiculously strong master. And that's because of Guide Spirit. Friendly Urami only, 8-inch range, only needs a 7, target takes a walk action. This makes it so that each Seishin you take, considering that it gets 2 AP when it activates, essentially gives one of your other models 1 walk action, or even 2 walk actions if you're willing to cheat in the 7, because on average you're going to get one of them. Sometimes you'll get more lucky, sometimes you'll get less lucky, but on average it means you're spending 2 stones to give walk actions to 6 stone models, 7 stone models, 8 stone models, etc., and so on, and you're not using the actual AP that you would rather be using to either deal damage or walk even further away in order to scheme or get into a better position for Kirai herself. Like, you don't want to spend a master's AP just to walk when you could use it to heal something or summon something or attack something and then coordinated attack trigger into letting something else attack. Hey there, post-recording Boletsky here. One thing I forgot to mention is the purification trigger, and it's kind of embarrassing that I forgot to mention this, considering it was one of the reasons why I said Kirai was super strong at ignoring the gimmicks of other masters. In addition to Lost Love being able to remove conditions off models, so can Seishin. It does need a tome of a 7 or more, which is not always going to be available to you, but you know, with 6 cards in your hand, maybe a draw or 2 from a drowned, and also just flipping, it'll come into play. You know, you take slow off your models, you take poisoned off your models. Ending conditions is very, very strong. Seishin are just incredibly, incredibly good. They're 2 wounds and incorporeal, and despite them being incredibly squishy, or rather incredibly easy to hit with defense 3, willpower 3, 2 wounds and incorporeal gives them effectively 3 health, which is pretty difficult to take out at range. A walk charge, unless you have 3 min damage, you know, you cheat high enough to give your opponent a negative flip. If he only deals 2 damage, well, the Seishin lives, and then once the Seishin activates, it heals itself. And that's the other thing that they can do is spiritual healing. Friendly Urami models that start their activation within 2 heal 1, which is pretty nice. It's not awful to, or rather, it's not great to heal just 1, but it's free as long as you're within 2. It's not going to come into play because usually my Seishin only walk once throughout the entire game, if at all. Usually the 8-inch range from the deployment zone is enough to do what they need to do for the entire game. So a lot of your other models are stuck in the fray and your Seishin aren't near there, nor do they really want to be there, because that's when they can kind of get sniped while they're near other enemy models. Obviously they're insignificant, so they can't scheme themselves, but they allow other things to scheme. And that's pretty much it. Just one of the best 2 stone models you can get in the entire game. If not actually the best 2 stone model in the entire game. Next is Onryo, or Onryo. 5 cost, and now we're getting into models that are actually going to be seeing combat, so their health and defensive abilities matter more. 5 health, defense 5, willpower 4, and incorporeal makes it so that they perfectly survive 1 to 2 hits. Usually they'll survive, usually they'll take either 2 or 3 hits to take down, which is perfect for a model that's as low as 5 stones. Incorporeal with 5 move gives them, along with the guide spirit from the Seishin, gives them the perfect amount of mobility, especially for a 5 cost model that can also do other stuff. They have an okay attack action. It's 1 inch. It gives you an engagement range, and as a tiny little bonus, it has puncture. Why not? If you get a ram, if you get lucky, you might deal 3 or 4 damage with this tiny little 5 cost model. Feast of Vengeance is always there. Not going to come into play very often, but it's there. What you really want to pay attention to is Projected Voice and Mark of Vengeance. Mark of Vengeance is the easiest way to put adversary on something. It's a built-in suit, so I don't even consider the actual effect of Mark of Vengeance the effect. I really just consider it give something adversary, and the canceling of healing is really just a bonus on top of that. Sometimes you'll come across a crew like Pigs, like Tri Chi, like Experimental, where healing is a big part of what the crew does, and you're just going to be thankful to have it, but it's not really what is super important. Projected Voice is an incredibly good attack action a ranged attack action for a 5-cost model. It's got 10-inch range, so not 8. 10 is really long. Stat 5 is whatever, it's not 4, so that's great. It goes against willpower. A lot of models have lower willpower than defense. You know, your mileage may vary. But the big thing is that it has blast markers. And almost always I take 2 Onryo, and on the first turn they walk once and focus. And then on the second turn they either focus and attack if they're already in range, or they walk, focus, and attack, in addition to mark of vengeance. And so you can essentially think of this damage track as long as you pick the right targets, because it's very difficult to not have 2 models standing within 50 millimeters of each other. It's essentially 2, 5, 7 damage minimum. If you can hit 3 models with it, it's like having 2, 7, 10 damage, which is completely insane. And then if you get the crow trigger on top of that, if you're lucky enough to either flip a high crow, or if you already hit and your opponent kind of gives up, and then you can actually cheat in a lower crow, you give all of the models that are damaged Distracted 1, which is incredibly good. Distracted is not the craziest condition in the game, but it essentially forces your opponent to focus in order to get rid of it, or kind of just suffer the fact that one of their attack actions isn't going to do anything because it's at a minus. And there's a lot of situations in which being forced to focus, for example, doesn't let you walk and charge with 2 AP. And it just limits your opponent's options. Putting Distracted on 2 to 3 enemies, as well as doing, 5 to 7 damage, let's say, for moderate damage, is just insanely good for a 5-cost model. That's kind of all they do. They're usually my model that does the schemes for me after doing that initial attack on turn 2. After that, they'll be pushed along by Seishin and walk and do schemes for me. Sometimes I send one Onryo to do schemes on turn 1, and then have one of them go for the focus attack. It really depends on the situation, obviously. And the nice thing is, even when they're going for schemes, they can still mark a vengeance every single turn with no detriment. It's just flip a card, stat 5. If you get lucky, they get adversary. That's really, really bad for them, so you can pull cards out of their hand that they would want to cheat to prevent that. And if they don't, then just everything gets a bonus, and you end up pulling even more cards out of their hand later, because now they're trying to dodge your attacks. Onryo are just really, really good. I say take 2 of them. Next, we're going to go over Goryo. Goryo are the hitting, the real powerhouse behind the crew. They're the damage dealers. For 8 cost, you get 7 wounds, so a little bit undervalued on the health, but you obviously have incorporeal. Defense 5, willpower 6 is excellent. Defense 5 is average, willpower 6 is great. They have Vengeance, obviously. Oh, I forgot to mention, on Onryo, they also have Demise Haunt. So if they find themselves in the middle of combat and they end up dying, they just give everyone adversary. And now you just sweep the rest of your opponent's crew with all of these free cards that you're flipping. Goryo have the same thing, Demise Haunt. Very, very good. Frenzy Charge will very rarely come into play, but when it does, it's extremely helpful. Sometimes you'll charge something, kill it, and then be able to charge again. It's almost like getting double the value out of your AP, because a charge gets you free movement on top of the attack that you want to use the AP for anyway. And the Goryo has 3 main actions. Let's go over Mark of Vengeance really quickly. Basically, don't care about these 2 triggers. I don't think I've ever used them. Mark Soul, however, is what you're really going for. Target gains adversary. Usually I'd rather have the Onryo give adversary, but occasionally this will come into play. Of course, the cannot heal effect is... Oof, that was bad. Of course, the cannot heal effect can also just end some crews. You know, McMorning is at 1 health and you mark a vengeance him. Now he's unable to heal and he's a lot less scary that way. But for the most part, you're not going to be using Mark of Vengeance because Violent Ghosts is just so good as a bonus action. It hits multiple things. 3-inch range around a 50mm base is massive in terms of AoE. It only requires a 6 to go off. And because the 2-3-4 damage flip suffers a minus, I just kind of consider it enemy models within range must pass a TN13 willpower duel or suffer 2 damage, maybe suffer 3 damage if they get unlucky. But, you know, if you hit 3 models with this, well, let's say if you hit 2 models with this, most likely one of them is going to fail unless they cheat. A lot of times I can hit 3 or even 4 models with this consistently, especially with the Goryo's 50mm base combined with the incorporeal charging that they're able to do. And then we have Balanced Sword, the incredibly strong attack action. 245 damage is incredible. I think 245 damage is maybe the best, I don't want to say the best as damage track in the game, because obviously it's not, there's better damage tracks, but usually models with 245 damage tracks are very cost effective, because you're not paying for that 3 minimum damage. You're not paying for that 5-7 moderate and severe damage. 245 is just excellent. You deal 2 damage at minimum to most models. If they have armor 1, then it's a 1-3-4 damage track, which is still really, really strong. And if they have armor 2, the moderate damage of 4 still inflicts 2 damage. So it's not that bad against armor 2, and along with Vengeance and Violent Ghosts, which pings even more all the 2 models, armor 2 models go down pretty quick for this crew, as well as Ikiryo, who does irreducible damage. 2 incredibly strong triggers in Puncture and Flay. Flay is a little bit less strong because you have to use a card out of your hand at the end of the day, but you know, you hit with Balanced Sword, you end up doing a negative flip, you use Flay. I will definitely pitch a 6 from my hand in order to do +2 damage. Same thing with Puncture, it makes negative flips into straight flips. You're really just looking to do that 4 damage. Overall, Goryo, really, really strong. Again, I take 2 of them. The way that I form my crew is usually Kirai, you give her the Whisper upgrade, obviously Ikiryo, which you get for free, Lost Love, and then immediately I just put in 2 Goryo, 2 Onryo, and 2 Seishin, and from there I'll choose what to swap out. And as we go along, we'll talk about what we can swap them out for. Now, Drowned this is your summon. Drowned only requires a 9 to summon, and because of the plus crow on melee actions from the summon upgrade that they get, they always activate Daze. Target gains stunned and is pushed up to 3 inches in any direction. This gives you a lot of board control. This gives you a lot of control over making your opponent's strong models do less damage because they no longer get their bonus actions as free actions, and they can no longer declare triggers, which is often where a lot of damage comes from. For example, on something like a Goryo, imagine not being able to use Puncture or Flay at all. 2-3-5 damage is not awful. It's a solid damage track. Stat 6 is great. 1-inch range is standard. And now Drowned have a lot of things that they can sort of do that's tricksy. They have Vengeance. Instead of Incorporeal, they have Hard to Wound, but they get Depths of Malifaux, so they're unaffected by severe and hazardous terrain, which is really nice because you still get to ignore terrain like Incorporeal models do. You just can't ignore impassable terrain, which is fine. Hard to Wound with 7 wounds, which is 1 more than their cost. Even though you're going to be summoning them, you're not actually paying for their cost. Defense 4, Willpower 5 doesn't really matter much when you have Hard to Wound. Hard to Wound essentially means that Very, very rarely, if ever, will your opponent be able to guarantee a straight flip on these guys, especially with combat finesse, because they can't cheat in melee with the drowned. Now, the big purpose of the drowned is you summon them turn 1, you summon it turn 2, and this is where you want your opponent's damage to go. While your Goryo are doing damage, while your Onryo are putting Mark of Vengeance on things, while your Seishin are moving things around, while Lost Love is healing things, while Ikiryo is attacking things, and while Kirai is just supporting the whole crew, you want to get these drowned in your opponent's face so that they either have to take disengage actions and waste their AP that they could be using attacking, or use those drowned, or have them attack the drowned. If the drowned dies, who cares? While they were attacking the drowned, they've been taking vengeance damage. They've been putting damage onto models that you didn't even pay for at the beginning of the game. They've been hopefully stunned and pushed 3 inches from daze wherever they are least, wherever your opponent's models are least effective. And by the time they get rid of the drowned that are blocking their path, you've pretty much just completely turned the tides of the fight, and your opponent can't deal with whatever's left over. Startle, their bonus action, is just a really, really easy thing to use. You charge with the drowned, you attack with your anchor, you try to daze something, and then if you push it away, or maybe if you are within 8 inches of an enemy scheme runner, or you're within 8 inches of something that might want to move next turn, you just throw it out there. If you don't get it, who cares? Maybe you got rid of a low card from your deck, that's great. If you do get it, well, then your opponent has to think about cheating it. Very rarely will I cheat Startle. I just throw it out there. It's free, it's easy, it's nice. Projectile Vomit is a crazy strong action as long as you can get a focus on the drowned. It's an 8-inch range. It ignores cover because it's not a gun action. Stat 5 is okay. It's against move, so you don't really have to worry about things with defense 6, but you do have to worry about things with move 6. It's not that important. Usually, well, pretty much always, you'll almost always be able to shoot something with 5 or less move. There's very rarely crews that have 6 move across the board for all of their models. And keep in mind, if you stagger your opponent from startled, they get -2 move for this duel. So that effectively gives you a stat 7 if you just get lucky on the 50-50 and startle your opponent. Projectile Vomit is incredibly strong because it gives an entire slew of enemies Distracted 1, Poison 1, and 1 damage. It's essentially saying, you focus, you try to get moderate damage. With 2 blasts, you can easily hit 3 models, if not 4. You give them all Distracted 1, so you force 4 of your opponent's models to focus, and they don't get the plus flip from the focus that they then use. You give them all Poison 1, which means that they take an additional damage at the end of the turn. You do 1 damage to them. Hopefully they don't have something like Shielded, because then the Distracted and the Poison don't go on them. The models damaged by this action gain the conditions. But, it's... If you hit with it, it's 4... Let's say 4 of your enemy models suffer 2 damage, gain Distracted, and you get to drop a Riptide marker once per activation, which gives another, for one of those markers, hopefully whichever one is touching the most enemy models, gives those enemy models an additional damage and staggered when they activate and move out of it, probably. Projectile Vomit is an incredibly strong action. Drowned are just great. There's almost nothing they can do wrong. They're just really good for soaking damage, really good for getting in the way, really good for making your opponent have to waste AP with the distracted, with the stun. You know, they're not getting the full. They're not getting the full cost of their AP out of using it. And then at the very end of all of that Drowned already do, hey, if you damage something with an upgrade, you draw a card for free, as if they didn't need, as if they didn't already do enough. So that's Drowned. Gaki, we're going to go over Gaki really quick. They have a range 0, stat 5 attack, which really sucks. 2, 3, 4. It's not awful. If it's just something you get for free, then fine. But, there's nothing to write home about. Coordinated attack is great. How often will it actually work? Probably not very often. Defense 4, willpower 4 means they're really easy to hit. Health 4 with incorporeal means they're usually going to take 2 attacks to take down. They're not bad. They're great if you get them for free, but I wouldn't summon them with Blood and Wind, unless you literally only have a 7 in hand. Jakuuna Ubume. Now, I am very torn on Jakuuna. On the one hand, the one nice thing about Jakuuna is that she's cost 8, so she very easily slots into one of the Goryo slots. Like I said, I take 2 Goryo at the beginning of every list, and then if I want to, I can take one out and then put in Jakuuna. Her stat line is very similar to a Goryo. Defense 5, willpower 6, vengeance, incorporeal, 7 wounds. They get a little bonus where they have serene countenance, so that's kind of, doubly your opponent has to focus in order to deal key damage to Jakuuna. If you're able to get a lot of distracted with the Onryo and the Drowned onto enemies, then Jakuuna will almost never go down because you essentially can't hit her. Jakuuna, in my opinion, does not do as much as the Goryo, but in some key situations, she can be much more powerful. Her attack action is definitely nothing to write home about. 1 inch, stat 6, 2, 3, 5 rather than 2, 4, 5 on the Goryo. The triggers are kind of I don't really care for them. Staggered. If you want something to be staggered, you have Drowned for that. You're coming with me if you have Drowned for that. Projected voice, you have Onryo for that, and this one doesn't even have the trigger to put distracted on your enemies. So the 2 things that Jakuuna can do that no one else can do is lure and the drowning aura. The drowning aura is incredibly strong if you can get Jakuuna to survive. The problem is that in order to have the drowning aura affect your enemies, especially with a size 2 Jakuuna, she's probably going to be right up in the thick of battle because it's not easy to have her stand just behind your models and affect enemies with hazardous terrain. Especially Goryo or 50mm bases, it's very easy to hide behind the Goryo because the aura doesn't go through your own models for line of sight purposes. So I would say test her out. She's been good for me sometimes. But between, what's better, drowning aura dealing hazardous to everything, or a Goryo that just straight up violent ghosts and deals 2 damage to something, it's comparable. And then the big thing she can do is lure. If the scheme pool makes lure very good, then take lure, take Jakuuna and use the lure. Usually I haven't really seen the need to lure things because you have Seishin to do all of the things that you need to do as far as movement actions for your own crew. But she can be good. Luring things can be very scary for your opponent. 12-inch range on a stat 7 is very, very good. Now we have Shikome. Shikome, they have a gimmick. Defense 5, willpower 5 is average. They don't have incorporeal, and they only have 7 wounds. So they'll go down in 2 to 3 attacks, especially if your opponent can get a couple of strong attacks in there with min 3, moderate 4. She might go down in 2 attacks. Her first gimmick is move 7 and flight, which makes them very, very fast. The issue is I would never actually pay for one when I can take Goryo or Onryo in my starting crew, and I would very rarely summon them because I always want to summon Drowned because they're just so good as summons. There is one incredible thing that Shikome can do. Because they're very fast, they can easily kill something, and when they, well, not easily, if there's something with 2 damage, 2 health left, you can, as soon as you summon the Shikome, charge it, and then hopefully kill it if it only has 2 health left. And then you get the Soul Hunter upgrade. Soul Hunter gives them adaptive, which gives them, at the start of this model's activation, choose a suit. This model adds the chosen suit to all its dual totals until the end of its activation. You always pick Rams with this. That gives you the Rip and Tear trigger on Challenge and Puncture on Menacing Talons. And from there, you just go straight for this 6 damage. That's a terrible arrow. You just go straight for the 6 damage as often as possible until the Shikome dies. Challenge is a fantastic action on most things that have it. There are a couple of problems with having challenge on the Shikome that is not the end of the world. So the first is Shikome are not very tanky. On the Autumn Knights, for instance, Autumn Knights are incredibly tanky models that are hard to take down, and when they challenge something, they're not going down. When the Shikome challenges something, the Shikome you probably want to attack anyway because they're so dangerous, especially if they already have the Soul Hunter upgrade. The second problem is that if you're using the challenge for Rip and Tear, then you have to be within melee range. So one of the uses for challenge is you challenge something that's way off over there, and since it's engaged with something else, suddenly it can't do anything in its activation. If you challenge something that's right next to you, then they're just going to attack you, especially if you're dangerous. So Shikome, good model in some cases. Sometimes I'll summon them turn 3. Turn 1 and 2, I really just want those drowned in order to have my opponent pump their effort into, drowned rather than Shikome. But Shikome can be very good. They are pretty good at attacking ski murmurs. And finally, we have Datsue Ba. Now, Datsue Ba I hate. I think that Datsue Ba is a complete waste of points. And let's go over why. So, defense 5, willpower 6, same as the Goryo. Movement 6, great, whatever. Incorporeal, terrifying 12, makes Datsue Ba pretty tanky. 8 wounds for 9 cost, a little bit less than average, but not terrible. So let's look at what Datsue Ba can do. Guide Spirit should not be something that you use on a 9 cost model. I don't care if you get the trigger and you get use the charge action. You already have Onryo, or you already have Seishin, which are 2 cost models that can do this. You should not be using this on a 9 cost model. Startle you have on Drowned. It's only 1 stat higher and it's the exact same effect, and that's your bonus action on this 9 cost model. Usually when I take 9 cost models, I expect them to have very, very strong bonus actions in order for them to have, with air quotes, 3 AP. The Skinning Knife is a 2-3-4. I don't care if it has stat 7. It's a 2-3-4 damage, and the triggers are whatever. If you manage to charge and kill something with a crow, you get a soul stone, whatever. If you get a ram, then they can't be reduced during using soul stones, but usually anything that's going to be using soul stones, I'm attacking with the Goryo, because the Goryo are going to be doing much more damage than Datsue Ba to begin with, especially with their much better offensive triggers. So Skinning Knife's not great, Startle's not great, Guide Spirit's not great. That leaves Wei Sins, which is a stat of 6 against willpower, 2/3/5, and if the target has the adversary condition, this action gains a plus to its damage flip, which is actually pretty good. But this is a 9-cost model, and it comes with the stipulation that in order for it to actually do something really good, you have to put this condition on your opponent. It's all of these other things, Jakuuna Ubume, Drowned, Goryo, the adversary condition is a bonus, but it's not required. If you don't have adversary on anything, Datsue Ba basically does almost nothing with his activation. Its activation is like the activation of a 6-cost model, maybe. I would not pay 9 cost for this. I would much rather, for 9, take, let's say, a Drowned and a Seishin and basically get the same exact kit for 1 stone less. Now, the one thing Datsue Ba has is Lantern of Souls, which I haven't mentioned yet, but if you need Lanterns of Souls, take Manos. Manos is a much better user of Lantern of Souls. He's more of an assassin model. He can use Leap. He can use his Yari, which will always have a built-in Siphon life trigger, thanks to Siphon Power, to deal 3 damage to whatever he needs to deal damage to. He is not as tanky as Datsue Ba, but with regeneration and extended reach, he's definitely not bad. And usually when you take Lantern of Souls, you're usually taking it because you really need to take down something. A Grave Golem, Leviticus. Maybe sometimes you'll take it because, against like rats or pigs, where you just kind of want it generally. But Datsue Ba wants to stay 8 inches away from combat because that's his effective range. But the Lanterns of Souls only has a 5-inch range. It's not synergistic. So if you need Lanterns of Souls, take Manos. That's my tip. I would never take Datsue Ba. The other thing Datsue Ba can do is Lost Love can teleport to him, but you can already teleport to Ikiryo, so it's not really necessary. The last thing I want to mention, as an honorable mention, is Dead Doxy. Dead Doxy is an incredibly, incredibly strong model. Dead Doxies have defense 5, willpower 5, move 5. Very average. They're only 6 costs, so they cost 7 with the additional stone that you have to pay for out of keyword. They have disguised, hard to wound, and regret, which makes them incredibly tanky. They can't be charged. If they are, if you walk up to them and hit them, then they get hard to wound. And if you walk up to them and hit them with something that hits really, really hard, well, then you can cheat in a mask and you end their activation. So it's like a lose-lose-lose just for the Dead Doxy getting attacked. And then you have Scarlet Temptation, which is where the Dead Doxy really comes into play. Enemy models within 1 inch suffer a minus to willpower duels generated by other friendly models. This makes the Dead Doxy incredibly dangerous in addition to being incredibly tanky. Fancy Cane is a decent attack action, not really much more to say. You can read the triggers yourself. Seduction, very occasionally, will be incredibly strong because you can target something with 2 focus and replace that 2 focus with Distracted 1. That's kind of like subtracting 3 AP from a model because they've paid 2 AP for the focus and now they have to pay another AP for another focus to get rid of the Distracted. Take by the Hand is another little movement trick. It kind of helps with the fact that Urami doesn't have a lot of things that can help models get out of combat, out of activation. It's really good to use on your own crew. It only requires a 6. That's really all there is to say. It's just a really tanky model with 8 wounds for 7 cost, with all these defensive things that it can do. Hidden Martyrs, Dead Doxy, every single time is one of the Hidden Martyrs because you have to kill him. There's so many willpower duels in Urami from, let's see, Violent Ghosts is a willpower duel. Mark of Vengeance and Projected Voice are both willpower duels. If It Matters, Dispel Magic is a willpower duel. Terrifying on Ikiryo is a willpower duel. And of course, Kirai's attack action is a willpower duel. So if the dead Doxy is within 1 inch of an enemy, like your opponent needs to get the dead Doxy either dead or away from that model, or that model is just going to either die or cause even more problems as suddenly my Onryo start focusing and shooting it and almost guaranteeing themselves the Ruptured Ears trigger as long as you have a moderate crow in your hand, and suddenly a bunch of your models have distracted one, and then they have to focus, and then they have to attack the dead Doxy, and then the dead Doxy, the distracted cancels with the focus, but then also they have to walk towards the dead Doxy because they can't charge her, but then also she has Heart to Wound, so the damage part of the focus doesn't matter much. It's just a bad situation. Dead Doxy, very, very strong model. So that's an overview of what the crew can do. Now we're going to take a look at specific situations in a couple of my recorded games to show examples of where some of these tricks can come into play. So here's a trick you can do with Kirai. Kirai is activating here. I use Intuition. Unfortunately, don't get a lot of great cards here, but it's not that important. It's only turn 1. I realize here that I can summon a Drowned, place it 6 inches away such that the Drowned is, just barely within 6 inches of Kirai, and this allows the Drowned to still be within 8 inches of the Whiskey Golem. Then I immediately cheat in a 5 of Tomes for Sooth Spirit to give that Drowned focused. The Drowned now has slow and focused, so now the Drowned uses his focus, attacks the Whiskey Golem that he's within 8 inches of, and then blasts twice, hitting 4 models. Now, in this case, I'm against Tri-Chi, so the poison doesn't really mean much, but still, these 4 models get distracted 1 and take a damage. That's effectively me dealing 4 damage and making him focus 4 times, but then not get the plus flip to the duel of the focus. So here, Brewmaster has lured the Goryo and then charged him. The Goryo has 4 poison on himself, which means that he activates with slow, and Brewmaster also has the 12 Cups of Coffee upgrade, so that within 4 inches of him, the Goryo can't take his bonus action. Here I activate the dead Doxy. The dead Doxy walks around, stays outside of 4 inches of Brewmaster, uses her bonus action on the Goryo, which pushes the Goryo 3 inches in any direction I want, taking him out of combat with the Brewmaster, pushing the dead Doxy closer, but not that important. Then I get to activate the Goryo, charge, thankfully using Incorporeal going through terrain, I don't care about terrain, and outside of 4 inches of Brewmaster, and then I have the bonus action with a range of 3 inches where I get to Haunted Spirits on 4 enemy models in addition to attacking the Moon Shinobi. Incredibly, incredibly strong. I'd also like to point out that the way that I'm able to place Ikiryo here, it was one of my first activations of the first turn. I just walked him twice up to the middle of the field, and there's very little that my opponent can do to damage Ikiryo, especially, let's say, if they had a lot of shooting, not this crew, but still. But Ikiryo can charge straight through this building and end up on the other side. For example, right now Ikiryo is threatening this Whiskey Golem, which especially doesn't want to get attacked by Ikiryo because the Whiskey Golem has armor too, and Ikiryo ignores that. Here in this case, the Brewmaster charged in the middle of my 4 models and gave them all a large amount of poison. Especially for Ikiryo and Goryo, this means that when they activate, they gain slow immediately. And if they want to attack, they can't use their bonus actions because of the 12 cups of coffee upgrade. And if they want to attack the Brewmaster, they can't because they are unable to charge since they're engaged. I didn't actually do it in this game, but what I could have done is I could have had the Drowned attack the Brewmaster, hit him with the Daze trigger, and just push the Brewmaster away, and then I could have activated the Ikiryo and the Goryo and had them freely act. Just goes to show the huge amount of versatility that the Drowned can provide for your crew. So here what I do instead is, first I activated the dead Doxy, pushed out of combat with the Brewmaster, charged the Whiskey Golem, and now the Whiskey Golem is within 2 inches of the dead Doxy and has negatives to all of its willpower duels. Then I activate the Onryo, make a small walk so that I'm within 10 inches of the Whiskey Golem, and use my focus from the first turn to shoot the Whiskey Golem. I have a double plus flip because the Whiskey Golem at this point also has adversary from the dead Goryo. So I flip 3 cards, he flips 2 cards and takes the least. I'm basically guaranteed to get this shot. And when I get this shot, I kill Apprentice Wesley and deal a lot of damage to Fingers. So here I'm in a situation where I have hidden martyrs on my dead Doxy, who unfortunately has 2 wounds and 3 poison on her, and is going to die at the end of this turn, denying me my victory point. So what I do is, with Lost Love, this is an incredibly strong scheme play here. I pitch a card in order to teleport next to Ikiryo. I then have line of sight because Cooper Jones is a 1 height model, so I have line of sight to my dead Doxy. I use Lost Love's attack action with my focus in order to take the poison, end the poison condition on the dead Doxy, letting it survive. And then finally, in the same activation, I'm also able to drop a scheme marker for Leave Your Mark in the center of the board. Here's an example where my opponent is able to activate his Whiskey Golem, but because the Whiskey Golem is within 1 inch of the dead Doxy, the Whiskey Golem can't attack Ikiryo because the Whiskey Golem has a negative flip to Terrifying Duels. Here's a quick demonstration of the Goryo using Frenzied Charge. This Goryo charges this Clockwork Trap, attacks it, kills it, alongside his bonus action, so he deals 1 damage and then uses the bonus action to deal another damage, and then is easily able to charge again, effectively getting, 2 walks and 2 attacks out of his 2 AP. So here, this is the top of turn 2, where Cornelius Bass and Perdita has done a real number on my Carrion Emissary. Kirai last turn summoned a Drowned over here near this building, which then got walked by a Seishin over to around the building. After Cornelius Bass has done a bunch of damage, the Drowned charges Perdita, attacks her, stuns her, staggers the Pale Rider so the Pale Rider doesn't have a bunch of his movement left, and overall just becomes a menace. And by the end of this turn, I now have 2 Drowned completely surrounding Perdita, not letting her attack anything that she wants to attack, and instead being forced to attack Drowned for the rest of this game. I also have this Goryo 2 over here, who is currently staggered and is not in range to charge Bass, who he really wants to do. But thanks to the Seishin, I can easily have the Goryo walk and then charge and attack Bass twice, in addition to using the bonus action. Also, this Goryo, who was at 3 wounds, thanks to, I believe in this case it was Lost Love, is now, or no, it was Kirai, quickly heals up to 6 wounds, and that's 3 wounds plus the incorporeal that you have to get past to get those 3 wounds. That's an effective heal of 4. Kirai is incredibly good at not letting her own models die. Here's the Goryo being pushed over by the Seishin. I also, at the same time, the same Seishin pushed Ikiryo, who was back here 3 inches. Ikiryo is staggered, and removed the staggered from him. Meanwhile, I have this Onryo with the glowing effect. The strategy is corrupted ley lines, so this Onryo is easily able to be pushed by the Seishin and walk and quickly get from strategy marker to strategy marker. Ikiryo here is in the middle of making a move. At the start of his activation, this is another display of how powerful Incorporeal is. Right now, I have assassinated on Cornelius Bass, so I actually need Cornelius Bass to live this turn so that I can get the first point for it. So I don't actually want to charge. If this was any other crew, Ikiryo would effectively do nothing this turn. But because I have Incorporeal, I'm able to move over here and then charge through the building and attack Perdita. And now Perdita is really stuck. And finally, Lost Love activates and does a power play here. I have a drowned at 1 wound with a point of burning who's about to die. I don't want that to happen, so I pitch my last card in order to let Lost Love teleport to Ikiryo. Then I use an action to heal the drowned up to 3 so that the burning will no longer kill him and he'll probably be able to activate next turn without dying. And then I move Lost Love over to the Pathfinder in order to engage him and get a take prisoner point. That's just some of the things that Lost Love can do. Thanks so much for watching my Kirai analysis, and congratulations if you actually got through the whole thing. Originally, I was planning for this to be about 20 minutes, but it turned out to be over an hour, and I think that's kind of ridiculous. Please leave a comment and tell me what parts of this you found really important or what parts you found superfluous. I really want to know what people are looking for so I can better structure these, and as every YouTuber says, please like and subscribe. Hopefully I can grow this channel. I plan to make one of these overviews every week, so you'll want to stay tuned in if you enjoy understanding Malifaux better. And yeah, see you later.